I came in with an absolute arrogance of, I know everything about maths, therefore I'll be able to be a maths teacher, and realised that actually that's not really that important when you're trying to teach. You need to know a little bit of maths, you need to know slightly more maths than the people that you're teaching, but you really need to know psychology, you need to know the backgrounds of the kids you're teaching, you need to know what makes them tick, and I realised I didn't know that at all.
Welcome to Talking Head, the podcast where innovative school leaders share the real strategies that work. I'm Ross, founder of Involve Education, and I believe the best insights in education come from the heads who are solving problems right now in real schools with real challenges. So each episode, I sit down with a school leader who's navigating something the rest of us can learn from. Not the polished conference presentations, but the honest conversations about what actually works. Today, I'm joined by Alex Pett from Logic Studio School, a 14 to 19 business and IT specialist school that's redefining what post-16 education looks like. With a sixth form 4 times larger than their Year 11 cohort, drawing students from across the region, Alex has created something unique. A professional environment that transforms students who don't traditionally thrive in education. From building custom tech solutions with Google Scripts to preparing students for an AI-driven workforce, Logic Studio School is proving that innovation doesn't always require expensive systems. Whether you're running a traditional secondary or exploring alternative pathways, Alex's insights on creating workplace-ready students and building cultures of professionalism offer strategies that you can adapt for your own context. So let's dive in. So let's start with your story. How did you end up leading Logic Studio School?
Crikey. So I suppose never intentionally, because when I first moved to Feltham as an area, the studio school itself didn't exist. So I first started teaching in 2007 through the Teach First programme, and then moved to Feltham Community College in 2009 and had a number of different roles at the school as a head of maths, as an assistant head, always involved heavily in teacher training. We recognised there was an issue, so we had a sixth form at Feltham Community College, but it was losing pupils. It wasn't turning out the top flight students at the end of GCSE that would then naturally then stay on to be able to take A-levels. So we then looked at setting up a different provision through the Studio Schools programme, and that was really focused around trying to capture not necessarily the top flight students, but the students who have done well at GCSE, have gained those passes, but for whom the college environment might not be the right place. How did I end up working there? I was there through its inception. Finding computer science teachers was very, very difficult. So I said that I'd try my hand at that sort of thing. Came on as an inaugural computer science teacher, and then...
What's your background then?
So my background is maths predominantly.
Okay, so there is a bit of coding kind of logic to move across there.
I mean, the interesting thing there is that we had to study coding at university, and I hated it. I thought, I'm here to do maths. I don't want to do the coding, but actually, it's been incredibly useful throughout.
Don't tell that to our lead senior developer. He's a maths graduate from Oxbridge, so he loves the maths and now loves coding.
Yeah, so that then brought me into Logic to start with, and then an opportunity came up to take on the leadership after the inaugural head left in 2000, and so I've stepped into that position and have now been there for the last 4 years. So I've now completed my first sort of 4 years where I've seen a year group through from year 10 all the way through to year 13.
And you mentioned this starting your journey in the Teach First programme. What was that like?
Tough and made me want to leave. I think I look back on things now, and certainly when I think about teacher training, it's why I got so heavily involved in teacher training. It was because I didn't want people to have to go through what I went through.
What made it so tough?
I suppose I came in with an absolute arrogance of, I know everything about maths, therefore I'll be able to be a maths teacher, and realised that actually that's not really that important when you're trying to teach. You need to know a little bit of maths, you need to know slightly more maths than the people that you're teaching, but you really need to know psychology, you need to know the backgrounds of the kids you're teaching, you need to know what makes them tick, and I realised I didn't know that at all. And teacher training is great. Don't get me wrong. And I think it's evolved massively. And I'm a massive fan of everything that's now sort of looked at in terms of cognitive load theory and everything that is being pushed in that sort of direction.
What's cognitive load theory? How does that impact this?
The idea that effectively that our long-term memory is infinite, but our short-term memory is finite. And we want to make sure that we can convert our short-term memory into our long-term memory. So looking at how we can manage that load with students if they get overloaded with something. I mean, the thing I always go back to is like learning to drive. The first time you get into a car, you are overwhelmed, right? Is that you've got gears, you've got indicators, you've got to be looking at what's on the road, you've got to pay attention to road. All of those things when you're 17 years old or older, if you haven't taken your test that early, are overwhelming. And you look at it and you think, crikey, how am I ever going to be able to do this? But, after you've been driving for a while, you realize that actually you drive to work in the morning and possibly don't remember quite how you got there because it's an ingrained thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's a wonderful thing in education, working out how we can create those shortcuts and how we can create those sort of mechanisms for learning that support students to develop that long-term understanding. It's something that we've put a lot of effort into with our own core curriculum, where we have what we call curriculum maps, really to support students to understand, well, week by week, what is it that they're doing today? How does that relate to what they're doing next? And how does it relate to what came before? So that they can start to build this sort of mental picture about their learning. And having that consistent across all subjects, I think is important, because the way they learn in maths is similar to how they learn in history and is similar to how they learn in computing. That we want them to have that similar sort of experience.
At Logic Studio School, you combine a focus on business and computing, which, for me, obviously, those two things, it feels obvious that they go hand in hand from my perspective running a tech company. So I guess what I want to know is the reason that Logic Studio School is focusing on business and IT because it's kind of mopping up the people who aren't good at anything else? Or is this something you believe is really transformational for students?
I think it's the transformational piece. Business and IT, both of those things. And I think for students pre-16, they will all take business. I think nigh on 92 to 95% of them will take computer science. So we have an emphasis on business and computing, that they are very strong subjects for us. And that's not, because the students necessarily have a strong background in them to that point. We're taking students onto GCSE computer science that have got no interest sometimes in computing, but we think that it's important that they do have an interest in it. And we show them how to have that interest. And likewise for business, I quite often talk to students about, what do you want to do next with your life? And they're not sure. And we talk about how business is the universal key, that actually there are many facets of business that will unlock many futures. So it teaches you about budgeting. Well, you're going to need to know how to do that to live your adult life. It teaches you how to market. Well, you need to market yourself in any situation. You need to go out and sell yourself if you're trying to gain a job. Those core business skills, like understanding leadership, understanding planning, they're really, really vital. And likewise for IT, they might not be the students that are going to code into the future, but AI means that they don't have to be now. What they have to do is they have to know how systems work and interact and understand how to leverage that technology to their benefit. And I think the merging of the two makes absolute sense, is that we want an economy that's going to exist on students that can leverage business and IT to do things that we can't currently do and increase productivity and unlock a large portion of our society.
I'm also slightly intrigued as to what business actually means in an educational setting, because when James and I founded Involve, the closest I'd come to starting a company had been, I had started a music events company with a couple of friends, but it was very much a kind of small fry company, quite simple. We could just use our accountant to get the papers filed with Companies House, and we didn't need to raise investment. And yeah, we had some kind of things that we had to do to be sort of, I think it's called fiduciary responsibilities, isn't it? To fulfill those and things like that. But then that was a world away from the kind of breadth of things that we had to do with Involve, all the way from, kind of putting together company articles and raising investment and figuring out how to work with lawyers on investor and shareholder agreements and negotiation, and then all the kind of product planning, the cash flows, the projections, all this kind of stuff. So rambling question, but I guess I'm kind of intrigued. What on earth do you teach them from that? How do you do an educational piece from that?
So I think it's just looking for opportunities, and some of those are external, and there are great sort of companies that we can be involved with that do sort of young social enterprise bits and pieces that will attract a particular type of student. More than anything, it's just trying to make it real, and trying to get that idea of ingenuity and creativity into things. So a lot of the courses that students will do post 16 will all involve some form of an events management piece. And some students then turn that into we're going to wash the teachers' cars for a day. Others take it to a different place and they look at running an escape room and bringing primary school children in to run an escape room for the day. Others are then looking at, they had a spicy noodle challenge this year. So they had a competition where they had all of the staff lined up. We all had to sign health and safety declarations and all of these bits and pieces. But it suddenly gets everybody talking about it, and then the younger years, and then looking up to this and thinking, oh, okay, well, these are things that we could be doing. We teach design courses at the school, and one of the students who was preparing a portfolio when he was off to university then spoke to a teacher and said, look, I don't really know what I need to do to put this portfolio together. And the teacher said, well, why don't you just go down the high street, speak to some businesses, see if they want some logo work done, come back here and do it. And lo and behold, he spent every night after school generating these new logos for companies, and then eventually one of the companies turned around and goes, do you know what, we're going to pay you to do that now, so we really want those services. And it's just encouraging students to have that freedom and that idea that okay, you might get knocked back. And sometimes when we are sitting in the room while they're on the phone to businesses to coach them through the conversations that they're having, it is heartbreaking when they have those first little things. And you do remember that actually, even as an adult, picking up the phone and cold calling a business isn't an easy thing to do, but showing the students that you can be vulnerable in that situation, makes them think, well, okay, well, maybe we can do this as well. And then you get through it and then you realize it didn't work. It doesn't matter. On to the next one then. Let's just keep going.
Oh, you talking about cold calling reminds me of, that was how we got our first schools on Involve back when we were, doing this for music department management. And none of us had got marketing or, cold calling experience. It was okay, right now the whole team has to start cold calling schools. It's really interesting, isn't it? I've come to realize and learn is that you never know the answer. So no one actually has all the expertise and experience to kind of do everything that's needed to run something like a company. So actually the reality is knowing that that's going to be your position and having an understanding of, well, when I face the next thing that I don't know the answer to, how do I get the answer? And then how do I implement that? And that sounds essentially like what you're through all of these projects that you're galvanizing the students through doing. You're saying, go and do this thing. And they're not going to have a clue where to start.
And I think that's so important, and it is increasingly difficult because students' perception of reality is fed to them through social media that is perfection, and they think, okay, well, if it has to be perfection, otherwise I can't do it. And you think, well, no, that's not how anything starts. Like, nobody released the perfect product first time over. What they did was they released version 1 and then they prototyped it, got an idea, improved it, and then improved that, and then improved that. And if you're constantly looking for that self-development and that product development, then that's where you make the difference. And I trying to create that mindset is hard, but it's something that I think is incumbent on us to do, so that we produce students that are hungry for that in their future.
What does workplace ready actually mean? It's something I've heard you say, and how can you have a concept of workplace ready when it feels like the workplace is changing so rapidly anyway?
Yeah, massively. And I think it's understanding that we're a bridge. So we are education at the top end. So we are bridging between school and the workplace, whatever that workplace may go on to look like. And as you rightly say, we'll probably look like many different things to many different individuals. But I think the things that we really try and hone in on are professionalism. So with all of our students, from the day they come in through the door, and again, bearing in mind that we've got students coming to us in year 10 and year 12 every year, 50% of our school is new every single year. It means that you really have to manage culture exceptionally well, because you're building it with 50% of your community every single year. So what do? We focus on professionalism. And professionalism is that workplace ready. It's that idea of The communication is so important, teaching students how to compose an email and how to ask for help at the right time, not to wait until the lesson and say, no, actually, I couldn't do the homework, but to speak to the teacher in advance, or to find them around the building and have that professional conversation. And for us to then challenge them sometimes on professional dress and challenge them on their professional language, and always erring it back to this idea of, well, it's about professionalism, because there are no arguments around that. You can't have an argument about, well, what's not professional and what is professional, and that's for the greater benefit. And I think that then bleeds into workplace ready, because the students are confident to speak to a range of adults. They are confident to be in different environments. And even when they're not, it's about taking them to those different environments, making them feel uncomfortable, coming back and then having the discussion afterwards about, see, that bad, was it? And what would we do differently? And how is that changing for you? So that they have those experiences, so that the first time they walk into an interview isn't the first time they walk into an interview. That we do an extensive amount of work with our students when they first join us around interview practice and speed networking and all of those sorts of things, so that they get used to talking to an array of different people. We run carousel activities throughout the year. So again, they're working in different teams, in different groups, sometimes with people they don't know or don't like. Well, that's fine, because actually you don't get to choose your colleagues. And it's important that we understand that if we don't get to choose them, we've got to understand how we can get the most out of that situation. And talking to students about that is really important.
I like your comment there, especially about sort of, the colleagues you have to work with. Now, I'm actually in the privileged position, as are you, I guess, to a certain extent, where you get a say on who gets to come and join your team. But we were doing this kind of day as a company. We'd hit some incredibly ambitious targets. And so James and I, we want you do something hard and then actually you get to celebrate that. We had a kind of day of fun with VR headsets, and then an activity that my EA Clem had put forward, which I thought was great, which was to go to a book on a kind of budget to spend on any kind of book they wanted, and then to go to a nice coffee shop with comfy chairs and just enjoy like some calm reading. This was necessary for us all. I had a wisdom tooth infection that day in the end, which was really annoying. So I by like halfway through, I was completely worn out and knackered and had to go home. Anyway, and they decided to choose a book for me instead, and the book they chose for me was Surrounded by Idiots. So clearly I've given them the perception that that's how I feel. So I clearly need to learn from your leadership style.
I mean, the only thing, Ross, I can really take away from that is that I'm sure if our business studies students listened to that, they'd say, you went out and bought the books. Why didn't you just go to a library? You'd take the books out for free and then save yourself a lot of money.
Well, yes. I have to admit, now you've said that, I'm thinking, yes, that could have been a line item that we don't need in our cash flow this month. I know you talk about the challenges that you're facing at the moment, and those are kind of from various different perspectives. So some around kind of T-levels and curriculum disruption, and some of the kind of future obstacles you're expecting, plus dealing with workplace transformation, which we've kind of talked about already, but also this explosion of AI and what that means both for learning and work. I guess I've given you a kind of a massive range of things there, but I guess I want you to help us understand, what do those challenges actually look like on the ground for real students? Can you tell us some stories of students where you're actually working this through in real life?
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose the biggest one is the workplace readiness thing again. And it was one that COVID has really killed. COVID came along and all of a sudden working from home became a thing. And I still to this day think, working from home is great for people that have already made it, and for people that are maybe 5, 6, 7 years into a career. But actually for those that are just starting out on that journey, work from home is awful, because not only do they not get to socialize or meet people in the company and make those connections in different places that, your workplace then affords you, but they don't get to do that learning that isn't necessarily explicit. They don't get to overhear the conversations from which they would gain so much. And, I think that as an early career piece is really challenging for our students that are then going into direct employment at this time. Then, yeah.
I don't know if you know this, but I'd actually be even stronger than you in what you've said. So at Involve, by default, we're fully in person, full time for everyone. Personally, I'm not even convinced that it's great for you after your 7 years experience to think that there isn't a huge amount still left to learn, even from the people who are coming in and starting out. We had some periods where we did try more of that kind of hybrid model, and the impact in particular for those with responsibility for leading and coordinating and bringing together was just awful. And we took the decision, actually this was immediately post-COVID, to go back fully in person full time. And at the time that you're kind of talking about this already, but if you think back to that time, it was so controversial, that all the kind of media articles were about how much more productive, how much better this was. And James and I were saying we're really convinced this is not correct. And we lost a few of our team as a result. They wanted to go for that flexibility. But for me, it's encouraging to hear you talking about the importance of being physically together as a team, and to hear that kind of, it's reassuring for me hearing that being taught as well to your students, because it is, as someone who does have responsibility for a team, it's so crucial to this team winning and succeeding together, to be together. And we can't be siloed by separating out in that way. But I've kind of stolen the narrative here, Alex.
It's an incendiary topic, isn't it? Because you then say, okay, well, if you're then being that rigid, then what happens if I've got childcare responsibility, those sorts of things? You think, well, no, it's not about that. That we can offer that level of flexibility. This is about a wider thing. And again, mental health is a huge thing around this as well, is that actually increasing numbers of young people are still living at home with their parents. Actually, if what they do is they then start a career where they are still living at home with their parents, it's not great. And actually offering them the opportunity to go to a workplace and to be around different people, again, is massively beneficial. But at the same time, there are those that are socially anxious that then struggle with those things. So I think there is some element of, the different workplaces work for different individuals. But from our point of view, it's that learning that goes on that's not explicit, that's not the taught thing, that is the overheard conversation that makes all of the difference. And I think that then takes me to the second piece, which is that schools are desperate to work with companies. To some extent, companies are desperate to work with schools, and trying to make it match in the middle is really difficult. And we get that, right? Is that we understand that what we're looking for is an imposition in your eyes, and that what companies are seeing it is as a burden. But we need to change the narrative on that. And it's just why we when we're talking to companies, we talk about an idea of a pipeline, is that we have a talent pipeline that can be molded in any which way a company chooses. And, if you want us to go heavier on a particular set of skills, we can do that. Now, obviously, if we're working with a large number of companies, how, responsive can we be with those things? Well, maybe not. But actually, a lot of the things that companies want are fairly similar. Students that are engaged, students that are good communicators, students that are going to ask the right questions. So those tend to be the things. And I think understanding that we've got the talent and that you want the talent, and the earlier you get involved in that conversation, the better the outcome will be. So work experience and work placements, they're not an imposition. This is this person is going to be paying taxes for the next 60 years of their life, probably. We want that person to enter the ground running. And the best way to do that is to give them real world experience. And that horrible cycle that everybody is caught in. What do I do to get a job? You need to get experience. So how do you get experience? Oh, you get a job. But how do you get a job? Well, you need to have experience. Okay, but I don't have that. So you're just caught in that constant cycle where they don't seem to have the necessary skills and experience. So it's trying to find ways to build that, which is a real challenge. And I get it. Companies' time is hard won, right? Is that you've got to make sensible business decisions to keep the company rolling. I totally understand that. But if what we offer is a person who's going to stay with you for 4 years as opposed to 2, then the saving is on your training of those individuals time and time again.
So I'm interested by this kind of. So my experience with bringing people in the team is I feel like, as a general rule, we all want a training course to go on, or a conference to go on that's going to give us everything we need. That's going to mean that we're amazing, and that's never quite true. So we're always looking for people who actually can can progress. And so a lot of the time people who start with us will feel like they're always being stretched beyond what they can do, and we say, yeah, that's great, isn't it? Because you're doing really well at it. Like, you're flourishing in that, you're just progressing. And they're like, but it's really hard. And you're like, yeah, that's fine. And actually, we've had a couple of people do work experience here, so I'm kind of interested in your take on this. When people come and do work experience with us, we don't actually treat it as mentoring or anything like that. We treat them as someone who has to provide more than the value that we are spending in having them there. Which it sounds really, actually, saying that sounds really utilitarian, but exploitative. As in, but a lot of that is because I genuinely want them to understand how rewarding that can be. So I'm just thinking back to it. One of our work experiences designed our office layout and ordered the furniture from IKEA for our and they had to put together those designs, get them approved with us, then put together a selection of options for furniture and things, and find out what was, go around the team and find out what people wanted, etc., etc. Then they had to, make the order, get approval for the payment and things like that. And actually, for us, it was really useful. It was something we'd been putting off because we were really busy, and for them, it was incredible. They did something of real value, and then actually quite often at the end of those 2 weeks, we try and have a little kind of send off. And a kind of part of the joy for me is seeing them realize that actually part of a bit like accomplishing something is a joy in itself. That actually it's not all about praise and reward. Some of the joy is in being the worker who helps.
And how many of those companies, how many companies around will have that list of things that they haven't quite got around to because it's fairly low level, it's fairly menial, it's a project that needs to be done, but they haven't got the time to do it. Great. Well, let's get the kids in to do that. And, we've spoken to the local authority about being able to provide some of those services for IT perspective, go around and support students with their staff with that. I think the point that you made a little while back was around you want people who are able to learn, and that's the key, right? Is that actually going over the other topics that you talked around about AI and those sorts of things, is that we're preparing students for a future that is completely unknown and that will change. We're not preparing them for a specific job. We're preparing them to go out and learn how to do whatever that job may become and how to be resilient in that. And I think that idea that you are learning business now so that you can learn to do other things in the future. You are learning maths now so that you can learn to do other things. That's the key, is that you teach students how to learn effectively. And once they know how to learn effectively, you put them in any environment and they will learn it and they will do it. And as you say, they will then be rewarded for it. And I think that's what we should be pushing towards, is this idea that, you never quite get there. We have a phrase in the school about next September, right? Is that next September we'll sort things out and we'll do these bits. And then it's that incremental change. And that's what we've done as a human race over time, is that always we're looking for that constant gradual improvement. And it's why everything is so much better now than it was 400, 500, 2,000 years ago, right? Is that we've made those incremental changes. We want the human race to continue doing those things. We want our society to continue doing those things. We want our students to be able to give those things to society, because ultimately they're going to be paying for my pension. So I need them to be really, really productive. Otherwise the whole thing is going to fall apart.
I can't resist, because you've kind of teed this up so perfectly. One of my favorite things to say is that I want to be allowed to redefine creativity as logical iteration towards beauty, which essentially is what you've described. It's lovely to hear you setting up so many opportunities for such a large number of students. Sometimes I feel like what we really understand, we're story driven, aren't we? That's what really engages us. And I guess what I want to kind of hear from you is the story of one student that sums up just what an impact actually focusing on this idea of the long term for a student, place readiness, education being about the rest of their life, not just getting them through the kind of 5 to 18 or whatever it is. Can you give us a story that helps us understand just the impact of what you're doing at Logic Studio School?
So I suppose the two natural things that come to mind. One is for a student who is just finishing with us this year, GCSE. The student was permanently excluded from another location, spent a year out of education, came to us, and the whole idea to start with amongst the staff was, we're just going to make this kid smile. Okay, and we're just going to have this relentless focus on, we're just going to make this kid smile. And for the first 6 weeks, that's what we did. We went out and relentlessly, every single member of staff was having those interactions to make this child feel a sense of belonging and to build up a level of trust, and that they are going to engage here. And it took time, but the trust was then built, and actually that student then realized that they were in a safe environment. They realized that actually they could pursue the things that they were really interested in. Now, unfortunately for us, their dreams are in catering and not necessarily in computing, but fantastic that, you know, they've got themselves now to an opportunity where they're not just looking at the catering college down the road, they're looking at the very best catering colleges that London has to offer. And that has taken an immense amount of time and effort and individualized sort of advice and guidance for that person. But they've responded to it so well. And it's one of those cases where everything just worked right. It was the school, it was the child, it was the parent, that they all want the same thing. When that happens, you get those massive gains. At the other end of the system, we're now really fortunate that one of our inaugural students who came to us has just finished at LSE doing their economics degree and responded to a call that we put out to our alumni network to have students to come back and be governors at the school. And it's fantastic that this person has then, you know, not only sort of taken up that opportunity, but then come and got back so involved with the school to say, well, you know, these things are going well, these things you probably want to look at, like these things need improving. You think this is so helpful that you've then got that sort of relationship with people where they then want to give back to society. And this idea that it should be cyclical, that you know, we're helping you at this time when you need it, on the understanding that later on you come back and help those that are here now. And that is a big part of what we're trying to do with our alumni program and the speed networking that we do, is that we say, well, we've got people that have done these things and that have done things similar to you. Let's bring them back and have you learn from them. And you know, these aren't necessarily students that, you know, come from overly affluent backgrounds that have all of those opportunities and things afforded to them. They're people that come from a socially deprived area of the country that deserve just as good a chance as anybody else, and they've been given that chance and they've really taken it and flourished with it.
I'm interested in the way that you're trying to scale this impact. You've told us some of those amazing stories of individuals, and you've mentioned things like the forgotten middle philosophy, this vision you have of trying to kind of broaden that impact for all the students who pass through your doors. And one of the things that kind of has struck me is I know that you're one of the 10 UK schools to be in a tech partnership with Monday.com, which personally I've got to say I think is amazing. I remember a head teacher asking me, you know, if there was one thing you wanted us to teach students, what would it be? And I said project management. There's just so much in project management. And for those listening who don't know what Monday.com is, it's a project management tool. I'm sure it would want me to say much more than that, but from our perspective, that's what it is. And so I'm really encouraged to hear that. So I'm interested, how are you using courses like this to scale that impact for students?
Yeah, I mean, that's genuinely really tough. And I think it's something that, you know, I remind myself about why I chose to stay in education, chose to become a head teacher, is to try and address some of those challenges that I think we face as a country, is that actually the people that tend to make the decisions and, you know, are informing policy haven't had any struggle on the way through, largely. Probably putting lots of people into a particular bucket at that point, but they're going to be the people that have been successful, and they're going to be the people that have, you know, seen A-levels, gone through A-levels, been successful, been off and had successful careers after that. I think, you know, that is, by 2023's data, about 30% of the population. So if you imagine, you know, 100% of your 16-year-olds going through, 30% of them will go through on straight A-levels. 55% are doing something else, and 12% do a mix. So those 55% are doing something like BTEC courses, other bits and pieces. That's a large population. So we've got to think about how are we managing them, how are we managing them to be effective, what are we doing to support them to contribute more. And I think for me it's about having these sorts of conversations and saying yes to lots of things, because we want, to scale the impact that we have, but we can only do that in a small way from where we are. What we want to do is to look at ways that we can change the national conversation around skills, that we can change the national conversation around what our young people should be doing between the ages of 16 and 18. But those are big things. And ultimately, I think education is very much like an oil tanker, like certainly where we are, is that you have to make sure that you're ahead of the curve, because that oil tanker takes a long time to move. So if I want to change my curriculum, I've got to start thinking, okay, well, what do I need them to do in 10, in 11, in 12, in 13, so that they're ready at the age of 18 to move on to that next step. And AI is a good example of that.
And so what does this Monday.com tech partnership and the courses around that, what does that look like?
So as I say, that the saying yes to things. So things drop in all the time, and you think, okay, well, let's just say yes to as much as we possibly can. And with Monday.com, it was a project that came about where I understand at this point, we have some lessons that are going to be delivered by a member of our staff that will be trained by their individuals, 3D modeling and understanding how to use 3D printers, and understanding how you could then use that in a business context to create a product, and then use an AI to then go back and forth and improve that product. And then, so these sorts of things came up, and you think, okay, well, it sounds a little bit loosey-goosey, but okay, let's run with it and see what happens. And this genuinely sounds like it should work, and we're the sorts of people that want to make it work. And again, I think that where companies have these great ideas, we just need to get behind them. And okay, it might mean that we have to work a bit harder to finesse some of the end product, because you're going through a pilot, that's what you do. But you understand that you finesse it for the benefit of the students that are in front of you, for the benefit of the students that are then going to go next afterwards.
And how has it been since you've said yes to
I mean, they've been superb. It's been such a straightforward process, and we're really excited about what the year ahead looks like. Not least to say, being able to pop round to their offices and take students in for insight days and all of those bits and pieces on the side. Which, for large scale organisations, insight days sound like a relatively low level thing to do, but actually taking students into London around nice office buildings and getting them to understand that this is somewhere where you could come and work.
Yeah.
Is really key. And that's in some ways what we've tried to model in our school building, is that it looks more like a modern office environment than it does a school. And again, that, linking back to what we were saying earlier, how are we preparing students for the workplace? We're giving them a school setting that feels more like a workplace than it does like a school. And I think that that's all part of it.
You have a slightly controversial approach to, or philosophy, I should say, to technology, which is build, don't buy. If I was going to summarize it. And so obviously sitting here as CEO of a tech company building for schools, I want to dig into this a little bit. So can you talk to me about this philosophy and how you've implemented it?
Absolutely. Again, having come to education in 2007 and been through a number of updates of MIS over that time, the update always looks like the version that came before it. Very, very different when you're on an iPhone and things, get updated and genuinely the app changes entirely. Things in school move really slowly, and it seems like there's a lot of things where you can pay an exorbitant amount of money to have something happen, or you can buy into lots of little bespoke systems that, this will do your behavior management really well, and this will do your parent communication really well, and this system will do really well at managing your seating plans, and this system will do and before you know it, if you're saying, these things all sound great, you're running 20 different systems across a school and nobody really knows how to exploit them. And I think the mantra that we've always had with everything that has been systems based is, what would it look like if this was simple? So be that from the behavior system. Okay, well, what would this look like if it was simple? Well, the teacher wants to be able to do something immediately. Okay, well, let's make that as easy as possible. And then let's build a system in the background that takes a report and then translates it into an email to parents, into a text to parents, and does all of the other things on the side, so that from the user's point of view, it's as easy as possible. They've got to deal with the fewest systems possible. It's why we went to Google to start with. So We were in the cloud from 2014, probably,
Uh,
well before
uh,
COVID had kicked in.
uh,
And we'd looked at, moving data to the cloud. There was some awful program at the time that was replicating your files. Absolute disaster with that until,
yeah.
so people's laptops were then syncing all of this
Mm,
terabytes of data down. It became a nightmare until we then realized that, there are going to be teething problems. There are going to be
uh,
problems that you face, but actually face them and say, okay, well, yep, we get that's a problem. Let's fix it. Let's now make this easier.
So can you tell us about this piece you've done with kind of custom Google script solutions
Yeah. So
and kind of give us an idea of, you talk about how schools can end up with 20 to 40 different platforms. How many have you got in place, and what does this look like? Have you cracked the
how
problem?
many platforms do we have in place? Well, we don't get paid for saying this, but we use a MailChimp as a CRM, which is phenomenal. Then off the back of that, we have custom written little APIs that will write into MailChimp. So if you take our application process, for instance, is that somebody applies via a Google form on our website. We capture that information and you can write a nice little script that says, I've recognized I've got a new application. I'm just going to trigger an email to our admin team to let them know this person's applied so that they can then make a phone call. Oh, I'm also going to just trigger this API that then says to MailChimp, here's a new user for that item. And then, I'm going to trigger another email to this person to introduce into a booking system through Google Calendar, various bits and pieces. And all of a sudden, like the kid has got like nice responses that look all slick and glossy. And I feel like at this point I've given away our best marketing advice, so we might want to edit that out of the podcast. But that for us is really key. And again, being a small scale school, we do have to look to make savings. So, if I want to have a texting service for my MIS, it's going to cost me an arm and a leg. Well, if I can write something that then just takes a spreadsheet export and then can send it off to another lovely service called ClickSend. Love that place. ClickSend, you send an email with a phone number in front of it and it converts it to a text and sends it out for fractions of a penny. Love it. Great. Okay, so we've now built a system that will be able to send our parents the text messages that they want to notify of achievements around the school and other things that are going on. So they're really simple things, but the main thing is thinking about it from the staff's point of view. What do the staff want more than anything? They want to be able to work from anywhere, right? Is that they do want to be able to work when they're at home. They do want to work when they're away in holidays and those sorts of things. So they need easy access to information. So we've given them that. And we don't ask for pointless data in between. I think that's been another big one for us, is that we don't ask for it if we don't use it.
So although I called you controversial in this, I have to admit that where Involve all started was a custom Google script and so I do have a soft spot for the way you're approaching this. And, my view on this as someone coming out of teaching was that the systems that we had available to us in schools just sucked. Essentially what you're saying is for the vast majority of platforms, you can do something better for yourself by writing it in a custom Google script. That isn't a great kind of affirmation of the software which is currently available to schools.
But equally, I think the software is incredibly de-skilling. If you go to a seating plan maker and within seconds it goes, oh, look, I've made you this lovely seating plan that tells you who your pupil premium kids are, who your EAL kids are, who your kids with additional needs are, and it's done it. The staff's made that in 2 seconds, 3 seconds? Have they engaged with the data? No, of course they haven't. It's ridiculous. So what you've done is you've provided a very glitzy tool that means that staff now engage less with the data than they did before. So if you have to do it manually by hand, okay, well, write out where you want everybody to sit. Okay, there you go. Right, here's your list of PP kids. Correlate. Okay, well, there we go. Now here's your list of EALs. Correlate. Okay. They've had to work hard. And again, going back to other things we've talked about around cognitive load, that if your brain isn't strained, you're not learning. And we talk about this with revision, that if the revision's easy, if you're just reading through your notes, you're creating no cognitive load, therefore you're not learning anything. So if I'm creating a seating plan and I've just done it without thinking, I haven't learned anything about my kids at that point, so why did we bother doing it? Well, because it looks nice on a piece of paper. Waste of time. Absolute waste of time.
One of the questions that we like to ask is the magic wand question. We've heard about how you've been kind of getting down and into the grittiness of custom Google scripts. But if you had a magic wand and you could get a company like ours to build the thing that you wanted, given our our focus really at Involve is trying to go for power and simplicity. What would it be and why? What would you use your magic wand to zap us into action to do?
I feel you're going to steal my ideas at this point. Something that I am very interested in is providing better information for parents. And I think, a lot of that at the moment is reliant on either having very up-to-date websites that are very easy to navigate. But even at that point, we live in a society now where you ask Google what to do and it tells you immediately what the answer is. There is a way of being able to provide chatbot-like facilities with enough prompting. And I think with AI being there now to be able to feed it your policies and RAG a sort of database for it to use, I think there's a phenomenal amount of power to be leveraged from that. I mean, very carefully, because it may end up that your parents know your policies better than you do to some extent. But I think providing that level of communication with parents would be key, because quite often, and when I think about engaging with my daughter's school, there are really basic things that you don't want to worry anybody about. You don't want to fuss around. Okay, well, what time does the basketball session finish this evening? Or what lunch is it when we go back after half term? Or what are the term dates going to be in this particular? All of those sorts of little menial things. Or can you remind me what the school sports day uniform policy is? All of those sorts of things that they're just simple call and responses, which is where technology should really be taking us. Is that's not a human's job to do anymore. No, you don't phone reception to do that. That's a waste of receptionist time. They can be doing other things that are providing greater benefit for the school. But also, it's going to provide a better link between the school and the parent. If they know and they can trust that information that they're getting that quickly, is that they can make that request, get that quick answer back and think, oh, okay, well, that's fine. And if they're wanting to window shop around new schools and they can, have that engagement before they've decided to pick a school, then they're probably going to ask a lot more questions on that front. So that,
Thank you.
I will claim the rights on that now. So once you've created that, Ross, I will take a healthy 20% of any profits that are made from that system.
Well, thank you very much, Alex. That's Alex Pett from Logic Studio School. If today's conversation about preparing students for an uncertain workforce sparked ideas for your own school, I'd love to hear about them. You can find more episodes of Talking Heads wherever you get your podcasts. And if you know a school leader with a story worth sharing, send them my way. Thanks for listening, and remember, the best leadership insights come from heads who are doing the work, not just talking about it. Until next time, lead well.